Okay, if I could have your attention. My name is Laura Milner, and I'm the very proud Dean of the College of Business Administration. On behalf of the faculty, staff, and Board of Advisors, it's my pleasure to welcome students to today's event as we celebrate the fourth of the Russell Cleary Leadership Lecture Series. The Russell Cleary Leadership Lecture is meant to welcome speakers of national and international renown, and today's speaker, Harry Kraemer, is no exception. At this point, I get to introduce Dr. Betsy Morgan, the provost of the university. She has been provost since 2015. She has a long history of commitment to student success. One of her major goals is to improve retention rates for traditionally underserved students with a particular focus on passage rates in gateway courses. Additionally, she's also pursuing university initiatives designed to increase all students' sense of belonging to the university. She's excited about this fall's opening of the new Pre-Health Advising Center for UWL graduates interested in pursuing healthcare-related fields, which I think has over 2,000 students in those majors. Her laser-like focus on student retention ensures that students do not walk out with a lot of student debt and no degrees. It's important that students graduate, because if you haven't recognized it, hopefully you will, and you will graduate. Because if you do not graduate with all the student debt you would carry, it would burden you for a lifetime. It would be awful. So we always encourage you to graduate. So with no further ado, well, I mean, sometimes kids are thinking, hey, I'll just stop out. Don't even think about it, all right? So we're very appreciative of Dr. Morgan's efforts to support students, and with no further ado, Dr. Betsy Morgan.
Thank you, Dr. Milner. I have to say it's perhaps not a testament to how people view me on campus when all of my colleagues laughed when she said laser-like. Random might be closer to what I normally am, and it came in my student comments often. Kind of goes off on tangents, like this one. See? Proving it to you, just in case you didn't know. Delightful to have you here, students, and those of you from the community, wonderful to have you. I have the pleasure of introducing Christine Cleary, but before I do that, just a couple of comments. First of all, you are here at a lecture series that is supported by the Cleary family, but particularly in honor and memory of Russell G. Cleary. Now, if that name doesn't ring a bell to you, if you're kind of new to La Crosse area, there's pretty much nothing that's good in La Crosse that hasn't been touched by this family. Certainly you'll, in terms of scholarships to this university, in terms of the speaker series, but in terms of Oktoberfest, and pretty much everything you think of when you think of La Crosse has a Cleary connection. Mr. Cleary himself was the CEO of the G. Heilman Brewing Company. Yes, he personally built that giant six-pack, students. Can I just make stuff up now? The whole family's delighted I'm doing this, so that's great. And he was able, in his role as CEO, he brought it from the 15th largest brewing industry to the 4th during his tenure. It's really remarkable. And we are particularly pleased to have several distinguished members from the family and friends, but particularly his wife Gail and his two daughters, Christine and Sandra. So we're welcome the Cleary family here. I do want to spend just a couple of comments talking to you about the importance of these types of events in the life of a university. Students, I know that we're just past midterms and you maybe have had 3 hours of sleep in the last few days, but besides the importance of graduating that Dean Milner has said, you will miss this kind of thing as you get older and you're out of college. It is really extraordinary privilege to get to take some time out of your life and whatever it is and just get to sit and listen to somebody else's wisdom and expertise. And then throughout your careers, whatever you choose to do, the ability to learn from one another and to hear new ideas is crucial to any kind of growth that you have as a human in your personal lives or your professional lives. Those of you who are College of Business Administration students, which I assume is probably all of you. Do we have anyone from College of Liberal Studies here? Seriously, you're graduating today. Congratulations. I'll just sign your diplomas over here to the right. The entire university, but particularly the CBA and so many of the great faculty over here, are really committed to the concept that education, particularly in business education, needs to be intricately related to our community partners and our business organizations, because that's what's going to make you more successful as you go out into the world. So I hope that you enjoy this chance to hear from someone with expertise. The other thing that I like about this kind of event, if you're not here as a student, is it is part of our mission as a university to help students develop the skills and the attitudes appropriate to being a lifelong learner. And I've recently, when I say recently, it was at lunch today, I heard that Christine Cleary was a student of our speaker. And I got to tell you, any faculty member will tell you, any student who ever wants to hear you say anything after the semester is over is just a miracle. So we're very excited about that. Okay, students, that was a joke. I know you haven't had much sleep. Should we try? Don't make me repeat it or do captions or anything like that. But that really is about lifelong learning, because we continue to come back to these themes and say, how do we learn? So I'm delighted to introduce to you the Executive Vice President and Legal Counsel for the Cleary Management Corporation, Christine Cleary.
Thank you very much, Provost Morgan. Thank you for your kind thoughts and interest in our family and giving kind of a little bit of the history. I can tell you a lot about our speaker today. In fact, I could give a speech on what he's done in his life and skills he's accomplished. But I don't need to do that, because you can go online, you can look at that, and he will probably give you a little insights into that. But one of the things I want to focus on is about 10 years ago, a student of his at Kellogg's, Adam Yoon, took a field trip to Kenya. While he was there, he started looking at the farming of those people there and realized that applying the modern technologies could enhance their living experience. And these people are right on the cutting edge of not making it. So it was really key. So what Adam Yoon did is move there and is working on a mission called 1 Acre Fund. When this student came back and told Professor Kraemer about what he was doing, Professor Kraemer has written 2 books, and he gives speeches around the country. And what he does is all the proceeds of those books and from his speeches goes to that 1 Acre Fund. So I think that's really a key to his testament of giving back and realizing that you have those visions and you put those actions to what you do in life. I was lucky enough to talk to Harry when I was considering going back to school. Now you might look at me and go, my God, when did you go back to school? It's been so long. But I just finished my executive MBA. After, I took about a 20-year gap between when I was going to go or not. But I talked to him about going to it when you are a lifelong learner. I wanted to learn more things and expand just what I was doing in life. And he encouraged me, and it was a wonderful thing. And then I was lucky enough to have him as a professor. For those of you who have been with us over the last 3 years, probably not many of you hit all 3, but we have been blessed to have 3 exceptional speakers. And it's a bar that's pretty high, and Harry has met or exceeds that bar. We are very much honored to have Harry join us today, both for his lecture and his willingness to respond to what's ever on your mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. We'll do this again. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay. It is my pleasure to have the opportunity to be here. And as Christine, this whole issue of leadership is one that I really love to focus on. And I think the fact that Mr. Cleary and his family have this is something to really think about. What does it really take for all of us to be leaders? And I know we have some leaders in the room, but what is very interesting to me is that everybody talks about the fact that we need more leaders. We need more leaders in business, academia, spiritual leaders, government leaders. But I think it's very important that we get very specific. You know, when we talk about we need more, what does that really mean? What does it really mean for each one of us to become better leaders? And those of us that have the opportunity to lead others, how do we really develop the next generation of leaders. And so what I try to focus on a lot is what are some of those characteristics and what are some principles that if we followed them, I think we could all be better leaders. So I'm going to give you a summary of a couple thoughts, but as Chris said, I'm going to try to leave as much time as possible for you to ask any questions that you'd like. I always tell folks that I have very, very few answers, but I have many, many opinions, okay? So I don't do Q&A, question and answer. I do a lot of Q&O, question and opinion, right? And I'm willing to share. And as I told a group earlier today, a big part of leadership is delegation. You'll learn that. You have to delegate. So if you ask me something pretty simple, pretty straightforward, I'll take it on. If it's more cerebral, thought-provoking, complex, I'll delegate that to Christine, who's one of my students. So I'm very relaxed about this. I hope you know that she's going to answer those questions. So this whole issue here, I actually think that there are a couple characteristics that are helpful. I'm going to go through a couple of them, and what I ask you to do is I mention a couple of these. Think about people that you know, people you've worked with or worked for, read about. How many of these characteristics do the people that you admire have? And if you do believe it's a journey, right, it's not a destination. Every day we're given, we can get better than the day before. Which of these would you say, I'm really good at that one I think I've got down, but that one I could actually get a little bit better at, okay? And then I'll try to give you some examples. The one that, and I'll try to give you some personal examples as well. The one that I always like to start off with that I think is very important for all of you is this whole idea of being able to keep things simple. And I say that because very often there are people that want to explain how complicated things are, right? This is complicated, that's complicated. And I think the people that are really good leaders, they figure out how to cut through the morass and figure out either what's the issue, what's the opportunity, and what's the simplest way to get at it, okay? The way I often tease folks that I worked with when I was at Baxter Healthcare, Baxter International, and other companies, is that very often somebody will come up to me and they'll say, I need to talk to you, Harry. This is very complicated. This is very, very complicated. And I would always tell people, that's why we have you. That's why we call it work, right? And if it was already simple, we may not need you, okay? Figuring out a way to sort of cut through the morass of this, right? And the other example I always love to use is somebody will say, you know, what kind of guy is Ted? And they'll say, very bright, very hardworking. The problem with Ted, he gets a little bit lost in the trees. He doesn't see the forest. Are you familiar with that expression? Lost in the trees, you don't see the forest? I've worked with some people, unfortunately, who do not even get to the trees. These are the people that are in the root system. They're in the root system. They've seen a tree, but the forest would be like the fifth dimension for these people. That ability to get from the roots to the trees to the forest. How does what we're doing fit into the total? How does this all fit together? I think becomes very, very important as a leader. The other one, which I think is very applicable for all of you as students, is that very often when I talk about leadership with younger people, they'll say, well, I really want to be a leader. I really, really want to be a leader. But Professor Kraemer, Harry, I got this little problem. And that is I have nobody reporting to me. So if I don't have a team that, how can I lead? And I always try to remind folks that the people that are the leaders, and I know we have a lot here, the people that are the leaders start leading long before they have anybody reporting to them, right? And when I say long before, I can go back when I first started at Baxter 38 years ago, right? I started with a group of 30 young people. You know, we were all 21 or 22. Nobody, by the way, had anybody reporting to them. But you could guess after about 3 weeks, the 2 or 3 people that you knew would someday be leading something. And you have to ask yourself, what is it, right? What is it? I think these are people who basically said, I'm going to get started now. Because I think they figured out one of the fundamental things of leadership, which is leadership has nothing to do with titles and organizational charts, right? Leadership has everything to do with the ability to influence people, and the only way you can influence people is you have to be able to relate to people. So if I can figure out how to relate to you, maybe I can influence you and I can lead you. And I think the earlier people realize, boy, if I can develop credibility, if I can develop trust, if I have a certain level of integrity that people can accept, I can probably lead anything, right? And so I think the earlier people get used to that, the better. Because very often, I was mentioning to some students earlier today, if you wait until people report to you, I think there's a tendency of, well, then I'm going to get you to do something because you report to me and I have power over you. But if you start leading before you have anybody reporting to you, and you start to convince people that you can get them to agree to something because you've convinced them it makes sense, that you can relate and influence, then by the time you have a group of people that actually report to you, you're not asking them to do something because they report to you. You're getting to do it because you've convinced them it makes sense. And you've actually set up in a scenario where, you know what, if it doesn't make sense, well, let's do something else because as a leader, I have absolutely no need to be right. I'm incredibly focused on trying to do the right thing, right? So this whole issue of I'm not going to wait for anything, right? I'm going to get started. And I always love to mention to students that very often many people feel like, okay, I've just started, or I'm an intern, I'm in my first year, I really can't lead anything yet because I've just started. And there's this view of, I've got to wait. And I'm always teasing people that the people that seem to feel they have to wait for somebody are all waiting for the same group of people called those guys. By the way, this is a gender-neutral term here. We're waiting for some famous men or women somewhere as opposed to, no, I am one of those guys. I'm one of the men or women who can get started, and I'd like to make a difference. And I think the earlier you figure this out, I think the better. And the example that I use is that I think I had been at Baxter Healthcare probably only for a couple months. And I had studied math, and I was literally in finance, and I was really working on a project where my boss said to me, hey, I really would like you to analyze this company and really do a value. So any of you in finance where, what's the company worth? What are the cash flows? What are the returns? What it's worth? So I did an analysis of this company, and I gave it to my boss, and my boss said, Harry, great job. You really, really did a great job. Well, I thought, okay, that's nice. It's nice that I hear that. And I just happened to be, sort of curious. I said, well, thanks for telling me that. What's the organization going to do with this now? What's Baxter going to do with this? And they said, well, we've decided that we're going to buy the company. And I said, oh, it's a great company. I'm glad that we're going to buy the company. What are we paying for the company? And they said, well, we're going to pay $100 million for the company. And I said, well, now I'm confused because you told me I did a good job. Part of my job was, in my analysis, was that you would never pay more than $50 million for the company. So I said, well, why are we paying $100 million? And he said, well, Harry, they've decided, that's what they've decided to do. And I said, well, who's decided? And he said, well, Harry, those guys. Those guys. And I said, no, who? Because if I knew who they were, I wouldn't be asking. And they said, well, Harry, the division president has bought off on this. I said, oh, division president. I said, well, if I happen to run into him, Harry, they've decided. I said, okay, but I'm just sort of curious. I didn't actually think I was right, but I was curious as to what was I missing and why were we going to pay more. And I said, maybe I taught Harry, no, they've decided. In fact, Harry, the chief financial officer of the company has decided. And I said, oh, well, if I happen to run, Harry, they've decided. Everybody's decided on this. He said, in fact, the CEO, the chief executive officer, he's decided. And I said, well, if I happen to run into him, he said, Harry, they've decided. Well, what all the young people knew, and I don't think some of the more experienced did, but all the young people knew that at 7 o'clock in the morning, every morning, the CEO of the company went into the cafeteria to pick up a grapefruit every morning. So the next morning, around 6:45, I'm just hanging around by the grapefruit, just kind of waiting around. And all of a sudden, Mr. Laux walks in. And I said, oh, Mr. Laux. And he said, who are you? I said, oh, I'm Harry Kraemer. And very friendly. He said, well, what are you doing? I said, I'm involved in valuations. And he said, what are you valuing? I said, well, I'm doing this valuation of this company. He goes, I love that company. I love that company. He goes, what do you think? I said, I love the company. It's a nice company. He goes, yeah, but you seem to be a little concerned. I said, well, I love the company. I can't come up with a value, though, of more than $50 million. He said, well, why are we paying $100 million? That's what I'm trying to understand. That's what I'm trying to understand. And he goes, well, what growth rate did you use? What margin did you use? And so on. And I'm explaining, and he goes, you raise a good point. He said, I'll tell you what, why don't you get your boss, why don't you guys come up to my office? So I ran back to my cubicle. I was all excited. And I said to my boss, I said, you're not going to believe who I ran into. I did run into him. I said, he wants us to come to his office. Well, I thought my boss was going to have a heart attack. I mean, the guy was like, breathing very deep. I said, no, he just wants to talk about it. So we went up to Mr. Locke's office, and he said, now, what growth rate did you use? What returns did you use? What cash flow assumptions? So I'm explaining it, and he stopped and he goes, I think that makes sense. He said, I'm going to basically tell the CFO that we're not going to buy the company unless we can get it for $50 million. So as we were leaving, he said, oh, by the way, he said, I ask you a favor. I said, what's that, Mr. Locke? He said, well, he said, the next time anybody ever asks you something, and if you don't think it makes sense, make sure that you, in a respectful way, challenge people. Because we don't want to do something that doesn't make sense. What do you think about that? And I said, well, that makes a lot of sense. That's great. I said, I actually thought, I didn't know what to think. I actually thought maybe you were one of those guys. And he said, well, who are those guys? And I thought, you know what? If the CEO doesn't know who they are, I don't think I'm going to worry about it a whole lot. Okay? And that whole idea of you're going to be respectful, you're going to challenge, and maybe sometimes you'll be wrong. But this whole idea of, well, geez, it doesn't make sense, but they must know something. Well, the people who know the job better than anybody are the people who are closest to it. So to assume that somebody up there knows, it's not a great assumption. In fact, I don't know if you've thought about this, but this is one that's worth thinking about as you start your careers. Have you ever thought about why so many really crazy things happen in companies? Really crazy things. You read in the newspaper and you say, well, how could they do something so stupid? Usually people say, oh, I know. The reason that happens is the CEO, he or she, they just made a mistake. That's how it happened. Well, obviously it's not that simple, right? Because they've got 10 or 15 senior people surrounding them, right? So how did all of those people make that mistake? And I think it's worth thinking about. So my opinion, my perspective is this, and I'll just role play this, right? If I'm the leader, and this is the team of people that report to me, and I say, hey gang, this is what I want to do. Go ahead, let's get it done. What I obviously meant to say was, well, that's what I want to do if it makes sense. But obviously if it doesn't make sense, I'm paying you folks, so if you don't think it makes sense, I assume you're going to tell me, right? Now, if I don't make it really clear to challenge me, if I sort of take this, arrogant attitude of, well, that's what I want to do, so just do it, we got a little bit of a problem, right? And now we got to ask ourselves, how do you define your job? So what's your name? Joseph. Okay, so let's be realistic. In a lot of organizations, Joseph may define his job as, well, I guess I'm supposed to make Harry happy. Harry's the boss, all right? Not challenging me, but well, that's what he wants to do. Well, think about it. If I don't make it clear I really want to be challenged, and you actually think your job description is to make me happy, welcome to the world of chaos, right? But if I sincerely let people know, I really want to know what you think, and let me know if you don't. And now the interesting part is how you define your job, right? Because maybe you should define your job not making Harry happy, but in a respectful way. I'll probably say that 20 times, in a very respectful way to say, hey, Harry, yes, you're the boss. You will make the final decision. But Harry, are you aware of A, B, and C? And given A, B, and C, is that what you really want to do? To at least give me the opportunity to say, hey, Joseph, no, I wasn't aware. Tell me a little bit more about A, B, and C. Given that, forget what I said. Let's do something else, right? Because a very strong leader explains to people they don't have to be right. They're trying to do the right thing, right? So that idea of keeping it simple and challenging people in a very, very respectful way, because you're one of those guys. You're one of those guys. I try to tell people, rather than watching the movie, you're in the movie. Right? And I often find there'll be people in organizations, you may have already seen it, they may be on clubs, they may whatever, they'll say, well, if it was my organization. Well, if you're in the organization, it is your organization if you're a leader, right? So this whole idea of getting involved, being part of it, and being willing in a respectful way to challenge, I think, is a very, very important part of leadership, okay? Any comments about that? Any thoughts on that? Because again, rather than having a monologue here, feel free to jump in. Leaders jump in. That's what leaders do, by the way, okay? Now, one thing that, as you're warming up to think of anything you'd like to talk about, one of the things I think is most important, and I talk about this, with Christine, her class, the most important thing I think related to leadership is the ability to be self-reflective. The ability to be self-reflective. And what I mean by that is, even now, with all the things that you folks are involved in, even though most of you I don't know, I would guess most people in this room have at least 3 or 4 times the number of things you'd like to do than you're ever going to get done. I don't mean to be disturbing you here on a Monday, but if you think about your schooling, your career, finding jobs, maybe your family, maybe your spirituality, a little exercise, a little bit of sleep occasionally, having a little bit of fun. Hopefully many folks in this room realize we're really here for a blink of an eye. Maybe you feel a moral responsibility to make the world a better place. There's a lot to do. Now, when you realize there's a lot to do and you think you may not be able to get it all done, the usual reaction of people as conscientious as you is, well, I'll just go faster and faster, right? This is where the multitasking kicks in, okay? And the question that I try to get people to think about, and this is a really good one to think about when you're taking a long walk or you're just reflecting, is have we confused activity and productivity? Have we confused activity and... We're very active. It's amazing how active we are, right? But how productive are we? Or are we moving so fast we really don't know how productive we are, right? Let's just keep moving. And I think the very first thing that a strong value-based leader does is take the time to self-reflect and become a little self-aware, right? And that process, in my mind, drives everything. And so when I say self-reflection, just to define this, for me what this means is you turn off all the gadgets, you turn off all the noise, you get off by yourself, and you ask yourself a couple of basic questions. And the types of questions I encourage folks to think about are questions like the following. What are my values? What is my purpose? No kidding around. What really matters? What kind of a leader do I want to be? What kind of example do I want to set for other people? Right? At least for myself, I'm not capable of thinking about those things when I'm doing 10 other things at the same time. But taking a little bit of time to think about this helps me separate out activity and productivity. It helps me get from the roots to the trees to the forest. It helps you prioritize, right? Because if you haven't seen it already, you'll get to the point where you just can't get everything done you'd like to get done. You can't do it, right? And so you have to figure out how you're going to prioritize. So how do you prioritize if you haven't really figured out what really matters, right? So this whole process, I think, of being self-reflective becomes very, very important, right? Now, when I talk about this with leaders, very often somebody will say, well, sounds great, but the problem is I don't have the time. I just don't have the time for this because I'm really busy. I'm really busy. And the challenge I always throw out is that we don't have the time, or is this something we really don't want to do, right? Because this could get a little sensitive. There could be a pretty big difference between what we say is important and what we're actually doing. We may not want to challenge. That could be a little too close to home, right? But we're talking about leadership. Leaders are willing to challenge themselves. Leaders are willing to put themselves out. That's what leaders do, right? And by the way, when we say we don't have the time, that's sort of interesting because most of us commute someplace, right? Some people try to exercise every day or take a walk or pray or meditate. Is it we don't have the time or is it something we don't want to do? Right? So that whole idea of self-reflection, I think, becomes very, very important. Very, very important. And I think when you think about a lot of the things that you deal with, even in school with all the pressures that you got, very often we end up spending a lot of time focusing on things much more than we wish we were. Right? And so I'll give you a list of some things I'm going to guess most of us deal with, probably a lot more than we wish we did. And I'll put them under the topics of worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and let's not forget about stress. Okay? So maybe I get a volunteer here. What do you absolutely know? Anybody? What do you know about worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress? Anybody? Yes. Very counterproductive. What else? It's a product of our environment. Yep. Worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress. What else? Yes? It's all inside of our head. Yeah. We have any healthcare folks? Not particularly health. It'll kill you. It'll kill you. Now here's the problem. If you wait until you're in the middle of the problem, okay, it's almost a little bit too late, right? If you're already wound up and I say, hey, don't worry about it, well, you're already worried about it, right? So to me, a big thought was, why would you wait until you're in the middle of the problem? Maybe you ought to think about these things before they happen. Because one of the things I realize, if you're self-reflective, there's not that many things to be surprised by. You may not know when it's going to happen, but it probably will happen, right? Some of you already may not have gotten the job you wish you did for the summer, or you may not have gotten the grade in the course you wished, or whatever, or somebody that you care about deeply passes away and dies, okay? Shouldn't be a surprise. These things happen, right? And I think if you're aware that sometimes things are going to go well and some things aren't going to go well, I think your self-reflection helps you deal with these things. So the example I give is on this worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress. If you think about it, most people's lives don't go like this. It just gets better and better and better. Maybe it's Chris. Her life just constantly is getting better, right? For most of us, there's a wave, okay? Now, in that wave, sometimes you get good days and bad days, right? And if I think of a wave like this, you know, the good days, it could be things go well in school, you get a great job, you get a promotion, whatever, and then you got bad days, right? You lose your job, somebody who cares about is ill. There's like a wave, right? And realizing, wait a minute, what I probably ought to start thinking about is not waiting until something really bad happens. Think about, what am I going to do when things are going well? So here's the next question. When things are going unbelievably well, not good or great, but when things are going phenomenally well, what's the one thing you know for sure? Anybody? Things have to get worse, okay? If they didn't get worse, Sandy, you'd be on this line with your sister. The things just get better and better and better, right? Yeah. No, they're going to get worse. So here was the big question in my mind. What am I going to do when things are going unbelievably well? What am I going to do? And I realized, I think I'm going to do two things. The first thing I'm going to do is be grateful, be thankful, support the team, give people credit, celebrate, enjoy it, really, really enjoy it. But here's the second thing we're going to do. We're going to ask ourselves the big question when things are going unbelievably well. What are we going to do when they turn down? Because they're going to turn down, okay? And I realized, I think there's only two things I have to do when things turn down. And I'm going to think about just before it happens. The first thing I'm going to do with a team of people is I'll try to do the right thing. Now, when you say you're going to do the right thing, that makes one enormous assumption. What's the right thing, right? And I'm not going to figure this out by myself. So I better surround myself with some really, truly values-driven people. Maybe somebody I went to school with, maybe a relative, maybe a significant other, maybe a roommate. I got to find some people who I know will help me try to do the right thing in an uncertain world, right? But we're going to try to do the right thing. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to try to do the best we can do. Now, I'm going through this quickly, but here's the deal. If you can convince yourself that no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what happens, we're going to do the right thing, we're going to do the best we can do. We're going to do the right thing, we're going to do the best we can do. I would argue worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress can be significantly reduced, right? I'm pretty well aware of the fact it can't be eliminated, right? One, we're human, so welcome to the human race. And some would say, some bosses we've had would say, a little bit of pressure and stress isn't all bad, okay? Problem is, often we got a lot more than a little bit. So that ability to put things into perspective is huge. It's huge. And I think what often happens is we let our overwhelm us, right? Some of you that, you're doing really great in school, but you got one more test, one more paper, one more this, my job on campus, whatever. And it's very easy to get completely overwhelmed. And this ability to put things into perspective, because as some of you know, as you move up, whether it's in school or whether you move up in jobs and take on more responsibilities, there's always going to be more to do. I always tease people in jobs that every time you get promoted, there's more to do, okay? But the key question is, when are you going to do it all? When are you possibly going to do it all? And I think that ability to figure out a way to put things into perspective and not to let it overwhelm you. Very easy to get overwhelmed in whatever you're doing. And I was very, very fortunate because when I first started my jobs, my grandfather lived with us. And there was a tremendous benefit, I think, of staying close to the different generations. And we don't do that as much as we used to. But the real benefit of that was when I first started my first job, and I would be complaining to my grandfather, and I'd say, Grandpa, you're not going to believe what happened. You're not going to believe what these people are doing. He'd stop and he'd say, Harry, that's why they call it work. That's why they call it work. And then he'd get a little Irish smile and he'd say, Harry, let me give you some advice. Tomorrow, when you go to work, if there are no problems and there are no issues, you may not have a job. And I thought, yeah, that's probably good to know. So 15, 20 years later, I never forgot that. In fact, I thought about that almost every day, to the point where 15 years later, when I was the president of the company, somebody would come in, people would come in and say, hey, Harry, I got a real problem. Well, Pete, congratulations. You still have a job. You still have a job. And I used to tease the lawyers a lot because sometimes a lawyer would say to me, Harry, we're going to get sued. We're going to get sued. I'd say, Charlie, thank God. Because if we didn't get sued, I probably don't need you. And he said, yeah, I guess that's true. All right? You just put it in perspective. By the way, we're not complacent about it. You hope it does. But when it happens, we got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. Right? And you can't let it overwhelm you. People used to say to me sometimes, they'd say, well, boy, Harry, Baxter's a $12 billion company. You're in 103 countries. You have 52,000 team members. What keeps you awake at night? And I used to say, by the time I go to sleep, nothing keeps me awake. And if it takes me more than 5 minutes to go to sleep, I'll read another book. I mean, you have to figure out a way to deal with this worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress. Right? And it's better to do it when you're younger. And by the way, we're not complacent. We're going to do the best job we can, as I said. We'll try to do the right thing. But putting it in perspective becomes unbelievably important. Right? Because at the end of the day, this isn't a sprint. Okay? This is a marathon. Okay? And if you're thinking about what you're going to be doing over the next 30 or 40 years, you either get completely overwhelmed or you somehow have to put it in perspective. And I think this self-reflection helps you be able to do that. Because I'm always fond of saying this whole idea of self-reflection, it sounds a little qualitative, particularly for a math major. Where's the calculus? And I always tell folks, everything related to leadership starts with self-reflection. Right? And it goes like this. Part one, if I'm not self-reflective, is it possible for me to know myself? I don't think so. Second part is, if I don't know myself, is it possible for me to lead myself? I don't think so. And the third part is, if I can't lead myself, how could I possibly lead other people? Right? So this whole thing about leadership actually starts with you. And that's why it's important to really make sure you're self-reflective enough and self-aware enough to be able to lead yourself. And I'm sure sometimes you've seen it. You can work for a boss, and they're just running around like a lunatic. Very, very hard to lead other people very effectively. Right? So that ability to be self-reflective, I think, becomes incredibly important. Any comments about self-reflection? Any thoughts? I can feel the self-reflection in the room just a little bit. Okay. Any thoughts on this? Okay. A couple other ones I'll just briefly mention in terms of these principles, and then maybe we can open it up here. One of the ones that I think is very, very important in addition to self-reflection is this whole idea of balance. And the whole idea here is very, very often you can talk about any issue and people have very, very strong opinions on a particular issue. But what I find out very often is many times when people have a very strong opinion, they have a very little understanding of perspectives other than their own. They understand theirs, but they have little understanding of other perspectives. And I think a person who's a value-based leader, they literally take the time to understand all sides of the story, right? Because if you think about virtually any issue you can think of, there's multiple ways of looking at it, right? And if you only understand one side, very, very difficult to have a holistic approach as to what the answers really are, okay? Or the other way that I try to think about this on a daily basis is this whole idea of seek to understand before you're understood. Right? Seek to understand before you're understood. If I'm the leader and I need to make the final decision, I'll make the final decision, but I'm going to make a much better decision if I can understand, what do you think? What do you think? Wait a minute, say that again? I think that's it. Because most really good leaders realize they don't usually come up with the answer themselves. They recognize it when they hear it. Right? But I'm only going to hear it if you actually believe I really want to know. right? So that ability from a balance standpoint to be able to understand all perspectives, I think becomes incredibly important in a leader, okay? A third one is what I refer to as true self-confidence. And this is another one of these, at some point in time, when you're really willing to kind of take a walk or step back, think about it, is do you really have true self-confidence? And very often students will say, well, what's the true? You're either self-confident or you're not. And I always remind folks that many of us have worked for people who can act very self-confident, who have no self-confidence at all. You may have run into these people. This is the macho thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm asking, do you have true self-confidence? Are you willing to admit what you know and what you don't know? Are you willing to admit that you were wrong, right? Or are you comfortable in your own skin? Or are you one of these people that you never can admit what you don't know? And I find it interesting. People that aren't willing to admit what they don't know, it's like carrying an anvil around. It gets really, really heavy, right? And I think people are nervous about admitting something that they don't know because what do people think of me if I tell them that I don't know? And again, I go back to that little simple thought. If leadership is about the ability to influence people, and the way you influence people is you relate to people, most people don't relate well to people who know everything, right? Most people don't relate well to people and never make a mistake, right? But if I say, I don't know, but you tell me how fast you need an answer, I know somebody who's got an answer, I don't think people are going to be disappointed, right? Because few people expect you to know everything, but they expect you to get an answer pretty quick. Right? So this whole idea of, I think, true self-confidence becomes very, very important. Okay? And then the fourth one, which I think is very important, is genuine humility. And I think in the leader, if you're going to relate to people, I think having humility becomes very important. But I never just say humility, I always say genuine humility, because many of us have worked with people who can act very humble, but they're not really humble at all. Right? And people see through that almost immediately. So that ability to see that it's a journey, and I'm going to become more self-reflective, I'm going to become more balanced, I'm going to develop true self-confidence and have genuine humility, I think you're in a position where literally you can lead yourself and so that you can lead other people. Right? And so on that journey then, I think those are the things that help to become a value-based leader. And then you have to spend a couple minutes thinking, okay, I'm becoming a value-based leader. How do I develop a value-based organization? And I think that requires you to step up to make sure that every single person possible, you help them develop to their full potential. Right? Because I know some of you may have already been in situations where you get feedback. And what I find often in most organizations, people don't really receive what I call open, honest, continuous, transparent feedback, right? We've all had bosses that'll say, well, just keep doing what you're doing. Hard to improve if you just keep doing what you're doing, right? But to give people feedback really requires you to realize that feedback is a gift. How can you possibly improve if people don't tell you how you can improve, right? And so that willingness and ability to be able to provide feedback, but then the other side of it is, how do you receive feedback, right? I've seen many people, maybe you have, where they say they want feedback, but as soon as you give them feedback, they immediately say, when did that happen? When did that happen? Well, what? I would say, well, wait a minute. Do I want to give feedback to somebody who's actually resistant to it? Or do you realize it's actually a gift? It's actually a gift. And I had a human resource person at Baxter who handled this, I thought, very, very well. They'd come into your office, you know, those Tiffany boxes, like one of the little powdered blue boxes. He'd put one of those on your desk. There was nothing in the box, but he'd put it on your desk and he'd say, Frank, am I going to get the gift of feedback? I said, oh yeah, you're getting the gift of feedback. And then he'd tell you a little something maybe you need to work on, and then he'd pick up the box and then he'd walk into somebody else's office. Right? But this whole idea of it really is a gift. And I describe it to leaders, I say, I don't think feedback is good to do or great to do. I actually think feedback is a moral responsibility. A moral responsibility. And people sometimes say, boy, that sounds kind of intense. I mean, moral responsibility. Well, I actually think it is. And I could use, I could give you any example of this. So what's your name? What is it? Jenna. So here's the thing that happens, and if it hasn't happened to you already, it will happen to you because most organizations, it works like this. So Jenna comes to work for the company, right? She's a young person. It's her first job. She's very good, very talented, good values, but there's something that she doesn't do very well. Let's just say her communication skills aren't great. But because she's a good person, because I like her, I never really tell her this communication thing is a problem. We just never really do it. Well, this goes on for 5 years. Well, at the end of 5 years, I end up moving someplace else, and you take my place. You actually believe feedback is a moral responsibility. So in the first 2 weeks, you say, hey, Jenna, you know, this is just my first perception. I've only been here for a couple weeks, but, you know, this communication thing's a problem. And the fact you've been here for 5 years, this could impact your career, I think, in a significant way. Now I say, all right, stop the clock. We wasted 5 years of her life. Why? Because I was trying to be nice to her? Because if I had said to her 5 years earlier, hey, Jenna, this is an issue, she could have said, boy, I better work on this. I better get a coach. I better learn something, right? As opposed to we let 5 years go by. So in my mind, this idea of feedback that I always refer to as open, honest, continuous, transparent feedback. And very often a leader will say to me, well, how do you know if you're good at how do you know if you're good at it? It's actually pretty simple. If I'm good at feedback, I will never surprise you. I will never surprise you. You will know, Jenna, what you do well, my perception of what you could improve on, and what the development plan is to help you get there, right? I will treat you exactly the way I'd like to be treated if the roles were reversed, right? But that does require me to make sure that I'm giving you feedback on a continuous basis. See, it's one of the other strange things. If any of you have had internships, you may have seen this in companies. A lot of organizations, they do this once a year, and they have this paper sheet you go through for human resources, and it's just a tough process. You know, I got to write these things down. Well, I look at it as, no, this is not a once-a-year sit-down piece of paper. This is something we're going to talk about on an ongoing basis. In fact, by the time we sit down for that once-a-year deal, there's nothing we'll talk about that we haven't talked about 4 or 5 times. Right? Because I have no need to surprise you. This is all a gift to help you reach your full potential. And if you're a really good leader, by the way, you want this to go both ways, right? So I'm going to say to Jenna, hey, Jenna, you know, here's some things. Now, by the way, yes, I know I'm the leader. Yes, I know you work for me. But if there's things I could be doing as a leader to improve, I'd love to hear about it because I'm trying to improve as well, right? As I said earlier, this leadership thing is a journey. I can get better each and every day I'm given. Each and every day I'm given. Right? So this whole idea of realizing once I've got my act together, you know, once I'm becoming a value-based leader, how do I truly develop people so that we have a value-based organization? Okay? So that's a couple of these concepts related to value-based leadership. I'm tempted to go, you know, another maybe 3-4 hours, but I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stop and take questions on either anything I've mentioned or anything I haven't mentioned that would be helpful on any of these leadership topics. And I know this isn't a quiet crowd until this UWL is a group that'll just sort of jump in. So any questions on any aspects of leadership? Yes. What's your name and what do you do? Okay, we'll get you the microphone here, and then the next person, if they get their hand up, we'll get the mic to them too. That's good.
So
what was your first name?
Kyle Miller.
Kyle?
You talked a lot about respect when being challenged, and like, what are some aspects of respect that you expect from like people that you work with and work under?
Yeah. So the way I think about this. And you'll notice most of these topics I try to keep very, very simple so I don't confuse myself, right? So the way I think about it is I want to make sure if you and I are going to have a discussion, or the 3 guys sitting next to you, if we're all on a team, rather than just making assumptions, how are we going to operate? How are we going to treat one another? What are we going to do? I'm a great believer in let's just set a clear expectation. I have this very, very simple formula. Number 1, let's set a clear expectation. Number 2, let's communicate it over and over again. Number 3, let's hold one another accountable. And then number 4, there's going to be consequences, positive, negative. So rather than something happening we don't feel good about, let's just openly talk about it. In fact, the example I usually give the students is, let's assume that you and the three other fellows, the four of you and I, we're on a team. I was thinking about this earlier today. So the five of us are on a team, and we have to turn in a paper that the five of us are going to work on, right? And the way it usually works is we say, okay, well, each one of us will do 20% of it, and it's due Friday, so we'll get together Thursday night to see how it's going. Typical reaction. Now, I would never do it that way because two problems maybe you've lived through are going to happen, right? Problem number one is at least one of the five of us are not going to do the 20%. We just know that's going to happen, right? But then it's like, well, do you say anything to the other person? You know, and then, by the way, when we say we're going to get together at 5 o'clock, there'll be at least one person that strolls in at 5:30, right? And that kind of bothers, but do you say anything? Do you do anything? Well, the whole reason that happened, I think, is because we didn't set a clear expectation. See, so back up the clock. A better way would have been, we sit down and say, okay, does it make sense to divide this into 5 pieces of 20%? Can everybody do that? Right? And you can almost tease somebody. What's your name on the end here? What is it? Robert Stewart? So I'm sure this won't happen. I'm sure this won't happen. But if you don't do the 20%, what's going to happen? See, nobody's offended yet because nobody made a mistake yet. But let's talk about that. If one of us, I'm sure it won't happen, but if one of us doesn't do the 20%, is our name going to be on the paper? Okay? No, it's probably not. And then we say, is getting together at 5, does that work for everybody? Now, if somebody says, hey, I can't be there at 5, class doesn't get out till 5:30, all right, should we make it 6? No, we can all be there at 5. We say, I'm sure this won't happen. But if you don't show up at 5, what happens? Okay? And you lay out. You set the expectation, you communicate, you hold people accountable, and there's consequences. And I think that's how we're going to treat people respectfully, right? It's when you know, it's funny. Often people sort of think, oh, people aren't considered, whatever. I think it's a case where if you don't set a clear expectation, nobody knew what they were supposed to do, right? I mean, I know people when you tell them 5 o'clock, they just assume you meant 5:30. I'm sure you haven't had that problem before, right? No, here's what I mean. Now, if it doesn't matter and you don't care if people are late, well, then don't worry about it. We're only going to focus on the things that, let's agree as a team, how are we going to be respectful of one another? What matters and what doesn't matter? And I got to tell you, no matter what the issue is, this can be something in school, this can be a low level, this can be a bunch of CEOs together. If you follow that example, it has an enormous impact on how effective you get things done. Okay? What else? Yes, over here. Maybe just yell it out and I'll repeat it.
Yeah, so when you're leading your team or organization, and there's 1,000 different ways to be a leader, and you're making decisions, there's 1,000 different ways to make that decision and not make a decision. And you're gathering input from different people to understand the problem and all the uncertainty that surrounds it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you remain decisive without being paralyzed by all the different ways you can do it, all the uncertainty and surrounding it?
Yeah, good. All right, so great question. I'll try to summarize it. You're the leader, and you have an issue. You need to make a decision. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. How do you know you're making the right decision, and how do you not get paralyzed that we could be making a mistake and maybe we're wrong, we ought to be doing something else? Is that close? All right. It's going to follow on exactly what his question was of setting a clear expectation. So what do I mean by that? Let's just say there's 7 or 8 of us on the team, okay? What I'm going to let everybody know is, here's how I'd like to, what is your name? Patrick. Here, I'll use you, Patrick, but I do the same thing with everybody in the team. I'd say, let's discuss, Patrick, how we're going to make a decision. I truly want to understand exactly what you think. I want to understand what she thinks. I want to understand what everybody thinks. As I said earlier, I'm going to seek to understand. I'm really going to seek to understand. And here's how we're going to do this. Patrick, if you have a recommendation for me, I will not make a decision until I understand your recommendation. And by the way, Patrick, one of 2 things is going to happen. I'm either going to accept your recommendation, or if I don't accept it and I do something else, you'll know why. And we literally go through the process. Then I'm going to say, hey, gang, here's one thing I know for sure. A lot of these issues, there's no clear answer. And also, we're definitely going to make a mistake. But what I'm going to do is, I'm going to listen carefully. I'm going to get everybody's input. I'm going to think this thing through, and in a world that's sometimes uncertain, we're going to make a decision. And by the way, Patrick, if we make a decision And it turns out a week later, we realize we should have done something else. Guess what? We'll stop, we'll change direction, and we'll do something else. See, as long as you start to realize what's a fact, we're never going to be right all the time. We're definitely going to make mistakes. Guess what? We're going to admit it when we make them, and then we'll make a correction. And see, that takes all the pressure out of the balloon here. Okay? If I felt I always needed to be right, there'd be a lot of pressure. There'd be a lot of stress. I don't have a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. I got a great team because I'm providing continuous feedback. We're constantly getting better as a team. And we make a mistake, we admit it. We're not complacent. I mean, we'll try to make less mistakes, but the only thing we know for sure is that mistakes are going to get made. We'll do the best we can do. Make sense? What else? Yes, in the back.
My name's Nikki. I'm a marketing major.
I'm sorry, you what?
My name's Nikki. I'm a marketing major.
Okay.
I was just wondering, who are some of your role models or mentors or people who have maybe sculpted you into the leader that you are and the values that you now hold?
Sure. I'll give you several, but first maybe I'll define the process. I develop these principles based on the people that I admire the most. So when I think of somebody, there are people that, for the most part, need to be somewhat self-reflective, clearly balanced. They know what they know what they don't know. They exhibit true self-confidence. They'll tell me if they don't know. And they've got enough genuine humility that even though they've done really well, maybe remarkably well, they never forget where they came from. They never forget where they came from. And people that have had the biggest impact on me would be Mr. Graham, who was the founder of Baxter, where I always say I went there for 2 years as a junior financial analyst, and I forgot to leave. I was there for 25 years. William Graham. A fellow who was in my class at Kellogg at Northwestern was Rick Waddell, who ended up becoming the CEO of Northern Trust Bank in Chicago. These are people, they know who they are, they know what's important, they're self-reflective, they prioritize, and they're the kind of people you'd absolutely want to work for. Okay, but those are the types of people that I find. The fellow who was the dean at Kellogg for a lot of years, that Peter also knows, Don Jacobs, very, very special guy. These are very bright people, but they'd always ask you, what do you think? What do you think we ought to do? They never let it become their ego. Right? In fact, I was mentioned to a group when somebody will say, well, how do you know if you have genuine humility? Right? Because one young woman said, hey, how do you know if you have it? And if you do, if you think you're genuine humility, how do you know if they do or not? And what I realized was I often will ask people this question, and this is one you can just think about. You ask somebody that's been successful, as all of you have been so far, whatever you're doing. How did you get to where you are so far? How did you get to where you are? Whatever your career is, whatever you're doing, how did you get there? The top two answers I almost always get, I can do this in any country, anywhere, younger people, older people will say, how did I get to where I am? Well, I worked very hard, and I have certain skill sets. That's how I got to where I am. And if I think about it quickly, I could say, yeah, I worked pretty hard. I have a couple skill sets. But if you're self-reflective, maybe there are other things that impacted your career, right? So I always name 5 that impacted my career, in addition to working hard. Number 1, luck. Number 2, timing, being in the right place at the right time. Number 3, the team, because if you don't have the team, you get nothing done. Number 4, mentors, people that actually help you get there. And then for some of us, there's a spiritual component. These are talents that I've sort of been received from the man upstairs. If any of those work for you, could be luck, could be timing, could be the team, could be mentors, could be a spiritual perspective. If any of those 5 work for you, you start to realize every single person matters. You don't forget where you came from. You keep things in perspective. At Baxter, we'd say you don't read your own press clippings. And the higher up you go, you surround yourself with people who knew you before you became a big shot. That's very, very key, by the way, because the higher up you go in an organization, there will be people that will start to say, you're amazing, you're remarkable. If you're not careful, you could actually believe it. And when you believe it, you got a real problem, okay? Why? Because if leadership is about the ability to influence people, and the way you influence people is you relate to people, most people do not relate well to egomaniacs. Most people do not relate to people where it's all about them. And then I think the light starts to go on. Every single person matters. That's the difference between humility and genuine humility. You know every person matters, and that's the way you operate. Okay? What else? Yes? Okay. Okay, sure. What she suggested was, it's one thing talking about this self-reflection. It's another literally getting a little concrete on what you could actually do. So students will sometimes say to me, well, can you give me some example? I mean, I'd like to think about this. What are we actually talking about? So I'll give you an example of what I do, but it's an opinion because there's an infinite number of ways to do this, right? Some of you may have gotten up this morning and gone for a jog, gone for a walk, done some meditation, whatever. The habit I've had that I mentioned to some colleagues earlier today that I do is at night. So the way I think about it, having 5 children, having a lot of teaching, a lot of boards or whatever, for me it's usually midnight when things calm down, and I go through a personal self-examination at the end of every day. You'll have your own, but mine sort of works 15 minutes. Mine sort of goes like this. What did I say I was going to do today? What did I actually do? What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? How did I lead people? How did I follow people? If I lived today over again, what would I have done differently? And then the last one is, if I have tomorrow, being fully well aware that sooner or later I won't, but if I do have tomorrow, and I'm a learning person, based on what I learned today, how will I operate differently tomorrow? I do that for 15 minutes every night. Now, students will say, well, do you do this every night? And I say, well, no, I do it every night. In fact, the example I would give is, most people here, if you guys are out at a party tonight till midnight, most of you will probably brush your teeth before you go to bed because you got into that habit. It's a habit, right? And the other one, folks will say, well, do you have to write it down? I don't think you have to write it down. I do, because if I don't write it down, am I self-reflecting or am I just daydreaming? Particularly if I've had a couple glasses of wine, I'm not sure, right? But it puts, well, here's 4 favorite words.